With the latest agriculture news from across the state and nation, it's time for the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. Here's your host, Sabrina Halvorson.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us this morning here on the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson here with Lorrie Boyer. Morning.
Good morning.
We talked on Friday about the confirmation hearing for Brooke Rollins, who is the president's pick for Agriculture Secretary, but there are a lot of confirmation hearings going on right now. So we wanted to chat about a couple others, starting off with former Representative Lee Zeldin, who is the president's pick to head the EPA. And he had his confirmation hearing. He was actually confirmed by the Senate last week to run the EPA. And the EPA, obviously an important organization for agriculture, most of the time are often at odds with agriculture. But I think that from what I gathered from that confirmation hearing and just what I've been reading, this could be a benefit to ag.
Exactly. And while he, I think, was kind of a surprise for a lot of people that his name came up, and he is a first congressional district congressman from New York, it is interesting on his take. Mainly what I've seen anyway from a lot of the things that have come out is on oil and gas versus biofuels. That's where the ag industry seems to be the most concerned at this point in time. I'm sure other things will pop up. At least that's most of the discussion I've seen. And he says he's going to have a balanced approach. And I think that's probably what won his favor as far as the ag side of things goes, as these lawmakers were questioning him. I would like to point out that, yes, you are so right. EPA and USDA have been at odds for a long, long time. But we saw last year where Vilsack and Reagan, the EPA head was Michael Reagan, and then, of course, USDA Secretary Tom Vilsack under the Biden administration, actually came together on several issues. And as we saw, even at one of our national meetings, they spoke together.
Yes.
And so that might be setting a new era of getting along and collaborating. Will that continue into this administration? That'll be interesting. I think it probably will, because it seems like all these heads are really on Trump's. Well, they have to be. They have to support him, obviously. But they all seem very similar in what they're making as far as comments and on the general attitude and feeling of collaboration.
Yeah, I think that you're right about that. I think that that kind of spirit of collaboration we'll see continue. And you were right about Vilsack and Reagan previously working together. They did quite a bit, and in fact, quite a bit more than I remember seeing in any other administrations. And I think that there was a lot of intention behind that. They wanted to build a better relationship between EPA and USDA. And the problem being with these two organizations is that they often have different missions, and they stick to their missions. And there are many times when the mission of the Environmental Protection Agency is not aligned with the mission of the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so it puts them at odds. But what I have seen in recent years, and like you were saying with the last administration, instead of being at odds, they were trying to find more ways to actually work together, realizing that agriculture can be good for the environment. And, we're not still farming like we were back in the 1950s, which is when a lot of these EPA regulations were actually put into place. And the EPA saying we need to update some of these regulations that were put into place back in the 1950s and 60s. So that type of collaboration, I think, has been very beneficial just for everybody.
Yes. And so I mentioned, as you're speaking here about collaboration, he's looking for balanced approaches. I mentioned biofuels versus the oil industry. And, Trump's always been kind of, let's find a fair and balanced way to support and handle both industries. Zeldin has come out saying almost the same thing, not in the same words, but he also has said that he is going to be doing some rollback of regulations related to meat packing, pollution, fertilizer, chemicals, and some other environmental standards. So hopefully that'll be good for agriculture. We'll have to wait and see there. But I also wanted to point out that he has been confirmed, but the vote on this was a little interesting to me as well. He was voted in as 56 to 42. I mean, that's a close little vote going on there.
That is a close vote. And I was kind of surprised as well. Obviously there's going to be a lot of people who just vote along party lines. People are going to vote for him because he's President Trump's pick. People are going to vote against him because he's President Trump's pick. Personally, I don't think that's a very effective way to vote. You need to, in situations like this, looking beyond party lines, I think can be very beneficial for our country. But when you're a career politician, that's not what you're going to do. You're going to stick with your party, right?
Yeah, that's a whole nother conversation we can have, because that is just, to me, wrong. These guys are making decisions that affect us now and in the future, our livelihoods, our kids, everything. They need to do their due diligence and vote on what's right and not on party line. But that's a whole nother issue.
That's a whole nother issue, right? And we could probably talk on that forever, but we won't. So, but the vote was really interesting. That's got to be hard, I would think, for him going in to know that you're going to have so many people voting against you too.
Yeah, that, mentally, that would be pretty daunting. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're literally have an uphill battle before you even start. So he must really want this job. So hopefully he will be good at his job and will make sure that he is using that fair and balanced approach. And I think that agriculture is really counting on that.
I agree. Absolutely. Agriculture is counting on that. We do need somebody in the EPA who's willing to work with agriculture, not just against agriculture. We're going to keep talking on this, and we do have some other cabinet positions to chat about as well, but we need to take a quick break. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. We're talking this morning about some cabinet picks for the president's new cabinet, and there have been confirmation hearings and a couple people put into place. We were just talking about the EPA and then Lee Zeldin. And you know what? I'm going to spend the next 4 years having to say that so carefully, because every time I glance at his name, I see Led Zeppelin, not
Oh,
not
no.
Lee Zeldin.
I wish you asked. Now I'm going to do that.
I apologize. But so, looking at him, and he is a former congressman and he's from New York. He served as an Army Reserve lieutenant colonel. And he has done a bit in his career as well. So I think he will be an interesting choice for the EPA.
Yes. Yeah.
So there was another confirmation, and this was for Commerce Secretary. And this was actually something that you have followed a little bit more than I have, Lorrie. So why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, and I'll have to share some background on him in just a moment. But what I wanted to talk about with regard to him, where this comes into play, well, I mean, a commerce secretary comes into play all of our everyday lives, agriculture and non-agriculture lives. But as far as the agriculture industry goes, we're really monitoring what he's doing and saying, because it is affecting our commodity markets. It affects our ag markets, and not necessarily a numbers game per se, but this is where reading between the lines and the feelings and the optics comes into play in the markets. I love covering ag markets for this reason, because some of the factors that affect our markets really has nothing to do with with actually what's going on. It has nothing to do with the actual numbers and data. It has to do with how people perceive things. And so this is one of those situations. So as you mentioned, he has been actually confirmed as our next Commerce Secretary. And speaking of him in the ag markets, he's been specifically this time here most recently because he was asked to comment on China's new AI, or artificial intelligence technology, and it's called DeepSeek. There's a lot out there. I don't know how far to get into it in our time here today. I think it's going to come back up for us, though, because it's going to affect a lot of our everyday lives, including agriculture. DeepSeek is a new AI technology that came out of China. And here is what he said about that. He said that he was asked, was it created using the theft of intellectual property? And that's been a big argument, I guess, if you will, or pushback. I don't know if argument's the right word, but pushback or concern for everyone in the United States is, were they using our U.S. intellectual property? He said that tighter technology export controls and stricter tariffs were needed. I'm not sure exactly how tariffs filter into that, but I'm sure it does somehow, because it's trade, it's commerce, and it affects the ag markets. I just don't know how exactly here today without doing further investigation and interviews. So he is on top of this as well, as far as knowing that people are concerned about it. I'll be interested and seeing what his comments are moving forward and how that affects the market. So that DeepSeek AI technology has been brought up in our commodity markets, as I mentioned. It kind of came out of nowhere, Sabrina. It was kind of under the radar, I think, which probably is one of the reasons why it startled the markets. And when we talk about when we talk about intellectual property, that does include ag. That does include our technology. That does include our food sources. You and I have talked about all the chain that goes into this, kind of the grain chains, if you will, and all those things, that transportation all comes into play when we're talking about artificial intelligence. And as we know, China sometimes doesn't always play fair and gets us when we're not looking. And this might be one of those times.
Yeah. So the person we're talking about again, Howard Lutnick, who is the president's choice to lead the Commerce Department. He is another billionaire, and I feel like it's just important to point that out. That I don't know what's the benefit of having a billionaire run the Commerce Department. It seems like maybe he knows a thing or two about money and business.
Sure, sure.
I did read that he is involved. He has positions in more than 800 businesses and private organizations. And he has to essentially, in order to accept this position, he has to sell off his business holdings within 90 days. Can you imagine being involved in 800 businesses and then also having to leave all 800 of those businesses within 90 days?
You must really want this job.
Yeah.
Wow.
A quote I saw, I think it was in the Associated Press, he said that he has realized that he's made enough money in his life. And so now he's ready to stop doing that to take this job.
Huh.
I
Okay.
guess the things that you only hear a billionaire say.
Yeah. Well, and I'm glad you looked some of that up. I didn't know some of his background. I didn't take a lot of
Yeah.
time to look that up. I was too busy trying to figure out what DeepSeek is.
And I want to talk more about that. We do have to head into a break here in a minute, but I am extremely, first off, I have to tell you, Lorrie, I love your enthusiasm for the agricultural markets. Honestly, the ag markets are something that I have really struggled with. But you read markets, you give market news for other stations around the nation, and are a bit of a, I will use the word expert in this
Oh,
in this department. I know
whoa
you rely
now.
on experts, but but
Whoa.
I am very eager to hear more about how the ag markets were affected by talk about this Chinese AI. So we're going to talk more about that coming up in the next segment. We are going to take a quick break here. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
So we're talking this morning about the president's pick to lead the Commerce Department. He is Howard Lutnick. He is a billionaire financer involved in more than 800 businesses. And one of the things that we talked about before the break, Lorrie, actually, you were discussing how his comments on AI and this new AI from China, just in general, this AI from China did have an effect on our agricultural markets here in the U.S. And I am riveted to find out, how does this happen? Why do our markets respond to things like this? But like you pointed out also before the break, there is a lot of AI in ag, and there are a lot of ways that AI can affect ag right now as it's progressing so quickly and as we're needing more AI in ag like in any other industry. So it's not completely surprising that it would have an effect on our ag markets, but it's really interesting. So tell me more.
What I would like to say about what I do know about DeepSeek, and there is a lot of stuff that is floating around. I suspect there's a lot of misinformation floating around. There's some conspiracy floating around. But what I do know is this is a rather large, complex, very inclusive AI platform that China just released called DeepSeek. And it was actually a stock trading firm called Hive Flyer that released this, and it kind of went under the radar of, I'm sure some US intelligence knew about this, but all of a sudden it hit the United States, it hit the markets, and it's a lot more complex. This was in the works, I think, a lot longer than a lot of people realized. And so it took the markets by storm, literally. It like surprised the markets. It shook us up. And the reason, well, I'm going to come back to the ag markets because this all works together. It all works together. As we've talked about, agriculture is all tied in so many different aspects. Same thing here. So just recently what happened is it came out and it hit our major equity accounts. It hit the S&P and it hit all of the tech sector stocks under that, and it dropped. It dropped like 5.6% in one day because this came out, double-digit losses, which that does happen. That's not unheard of. It just doesn't happen very often. And it doesn't always happen in such an intensity. Now things have leveled off just a little bit more, but because it surprised everybody. Again, I love markets because it is so much on feeling and optics and perception and really less on data and hard numbers. Of course, unless you're releasing USDA reports, then it kind of filters back into the WASDA report and production numbers and what their expectations were, which is a whole nother topic for another day because they've been off on their numbers. And that has really filtered into markets and farm gate prices. But back to the DeepSeek thing. So then what happens is those major equity accounts go right into the different niches of markets, including the commodity markets. So right around that same time, early last week, we saw the commodity markets shook up as well, fell in line, and fell because of the announcement of DeepSeek. Things have leveled off. Traders have kind of gotten their heads back into the game a little bit and quit being so crazy about things. And now it's kind of leveling off. But now the thing is, they're all watching, okay, what exactly does this mean now? How does it affect us? Before the break, I mentioned that there is a lot of skepticism on what artificial, or I keep saying artificial, what intellectual intelligence they garnered from the United States and even other countries to put together their artificial intelligence. I think that is a very valid concern and does affect our markets as well, because now you have traders, you have big ag companies, and you even have individual farmers who are utilizing the markets to put hedges on their farm crops. Now you've got that all coming into play. And is China using that information? If so, how much information do they have? How localized is that information? It could even go back to our discussion when we were talking about foreign ownership near military bases. It could even go back to our discussion on drones and on the balloons that people have been seeing around off and on in the last couple of years. Like, were they garnering information? How does this all work together? Yes, I admit some of that could be conspiracy theory, but I think it's also very real when we're talking about how things work in the markets and how perception and optics are at play.
There is so much to unpack there.
But it all filters into one end thought process. And that is the fact that commodity markets are not always trading on actual data, actual numbers, and actual occurrences. We're trading on optics, perception, rumors. I mean, how many times have I talked about rumors over the decades that I've been doing this? And not only that, but uh, weather, and even sometimes a weather forecaster will get something off and the markets will react to that. I mean, they're
Wow.
finicky. They're finicky.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. And the markets are so important. It seems like they shouldn't be swayed so easily by like a bad weather report. But we're going to keep talking about this. We're going to take a quick break and we'll continue the conversation when we get back. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. The market expert is Lorrie Boyer. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We are chatting about several things. We are now talking about AI and how news about AI can affect the agricultural markets, which I, again, find to be, I'm just completely enthralled in everything that you're explaining this morning, Lorrie. You know, and one of the things that you talked about is how was this the AI created? Because in order to train AI, if you will, you have to have other examples that it can pull from. And as far as markets go and as far as what this AI does, I don't know. But I know from many conversations I've had on AI writing platforms, and this is a hot topic I got into on LinkedIn of all places, but talking about AI that actually writes content. And there was a discussion on, well, if an article that you submit is too good, people think it's AI now. And my comment back to that was that, look, I've been a professional writer for 35 years and I have thousands of articles out for free on the internet. So if there is good writing out there and somebody thinks, you know, it's not because I'm using AI, it's because AI is using me. I am certain that with all of the content that I have out there on the internet, at some point AI came across it and has used part of that in their learning. And, you know, and that's not to say that I'm a great writer and that everybody should be learning from me, but simply that is how AI works. It scours the internet for what it needs, pulls from it, takes it, uses that to train and learn, and then it regurgitates what it has learned. Similar situation with this AI, and that's kind of the discussion on this AI that was released from China, DeepSeek. What did it pull from? What did it steal to do its learning?
mm-hmm. And that is absolutely correct. What you're saying is that even though we feel like AI, I just have to say this, that Lorrie has to retrain her brain when I'm talking about AI, because I'm used to saying artificial insemination for the last 28 years. When we say AI, I'm thinking breeding cattle. So,
Right.
or livestock, not just cattle, livestock. So, okay, I just have to get that out there because my brain just automatically goes to that. However, back to our conversation is that you're absolutely right. We humans are training AI. Now, I could go into a whole nother little side note on this because I interviewed somebody. It kind of scared me, to be honest with you. He's God, I can't remember what his exact title is, but he's with South Dakota University and South Dakota State University, I think. And this is what he does for a living, is learns and then trains other people into things like this, like the AI space. And he kind of scared me because sooner or later, AI is going to pick up so much and become so big and so massive that at what point does it really take over our own thinking and stuff. So anyway, that's a whole nother side note, but it's a little scary. But back to your point is that it is picking up what we're putting out there. It is picking up our thoughts and our feelings and what it perceives, and it gloms onto that, and then it translates into this platform. And in this case, we're talking about what's called DeepSeek, which is a Chinese AI platform that was released here recently. It's similar to what we consider here in the United States Chat GPT, or even you hear about some of the different chat bots that are out there. I don't know all of them off the top of my head, but I have personally used Chat GPT. I have found it to be useful in some situations and not so useful in others. I actually had it put together a workout plan for me and a meal plan for me. But then I asked it to do some writing for me, like a little tag for a post for me. And it was weird. It was just didn't even sound like me. So,
Right.
so I think it's useful in some situations, but it's going, as to your point, it's going to learn more about me. And then pretty soon it will be like like a AI Lori Boyer out there.
Which is, again, scary. Nothing against you, Lori Boyer, but I like the human version.
It's kind of
And, and it brings me back to this question that I've been asking for the last 5 years since AI became such a big topic. Did nobody watch Terminator? We know how this ends, right?
you're right.
The
That's the
machines
first thing
take
I think
over.
of. Yeah.
Right. But so, all joking aside, though, it is really interesting how the news of the DeepSeek from China affected our agricultural markets, which is what brought us onto this whole conversation. And the idea that that type of technology just being discussed can affect how people are buying agricultural products, which is essentially what affects our markets. That's how it works. So, this does have, while it seems like such a distant conversation for many of us, this has real world effects in right here, with our farmers and ranchers.
It has already come hard and heavy here. So I anticipate that will continue. That momentum will continue. Things are happening so quickly that we're not always going to know exactly what is happening with it until it's here. But to the point when we were bringing this back around to agriculture and to the commodity markets, now we're talking about economics. We're talking about economically valuable tasking. We are talking about confidential information. And we're talking about food supply chains. We're talking about transportation supply, all the way down to boots on the ground. And
Yeah.
it is exactly where it's going and is exactly where concerns are at. We haven't talked a lot about that when we were talking about our new heads of USDA and EPA, but I suspect that sooner or later it's all going to come into play. It's all going to be one big complex circle because you can't help but have these things come in. I already pointed out that we talked about drones and we talked about foreign ownership of ag land near military bases. Already, I see, I'm connecting the dots that this is all going to come back up, and you and I are going to be talking a lot more about that. But yeah, as far as our ag markets, I mean, we're talking again, the economics of things and how much information is out there, and the fact that it really did tank our markets for a very short amount of time, but a very intense couple of days when this was released because of the optics and the feeling and concern and questioning. What does this mean exactly for agriculture? We don't have the answers yet. We may never have all the answers, but what it does mean is that people are a little worried and a little bit concerned.
Right. And I think concern is appropriate. if nothing else, just because having that little bit of concern will make us keep a closer eye on it. And that, keeping that focus, that spotlight on the situation will hopefully help us be able to direct it into ways that will not be harmful for our agriculture.
It'll be interesting, Sabrina, moving forward. And we don't have the answers, and I don't think that we are ever actually going to have all the answers. But when we are talking about new technology and AI technology with regards to markets specifically in our conversations here today, it's going to add another layer onto risk for producers, another thing that they are going to have to factor in when marketing their crops and marketing their commodities. So we already have weather factored in, trade, all kinds of geopolitical events that are being factored in, and of course, these high input costs and inflation. And now we have another layer of something else that's going to have to be factored in, not immediately, but I would predict rather that this is coming soon. How is AI going to help or hinder those marketing decisions?
Yeah, those are all very good points. And again, we'll keep an eye on everything as it's going on. For now, though, we do need to take another break. This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. She's Lorrie Boyer. We'll be back.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson. Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
This segment is brought to you by UPL. We're talking today with Cassie Reeser. She is a technical service manager for UPL. So start off with, Cassie, tell our listeners what early season diseases almond growers should be watching for.
Yeah, so bloom time diseases for almonds, early season diseases are throughout the state, and those diseases range from anthracnose, bacterial spot, brown rot, jacket rot, leaf blight, scab, and shot hole. So a decent sized list for diseases to watch out for.
So with there being that decent sized list, like you said, several things that they need to watch for, what's the best thing that they could be doing?
So being proactive and kind of knowing your orchard and knowing what diseases you're at high risk for, and kind of knowing what products to use and the mode of action work best for those diseases. So for UPL, we are really excited to be able to offer growers a new mode of action, which is a FRAC Group 52 almond fungicide, and that is called Axios. So it is a brand new preventative and systemic activity mode of action fungicide, and it is an excellent fungicide that can help control that brown rot, monolinea, scab, and shot hole, as well as anthracnose. So it has most of those bloom time diseases covered.
And you mentioned that the best thing that they can do is know their orchard, which, of course, a lot of, almond growers, farmers in general, they know their orchards. But what would you suggest would be good ways to make sure they know what they're dealing with there?
I'm just making sure that they get out into the field, or at least have a PCA go out into their field, especially with this springtime rain that we're getting. Kind of going out, monitoring when their trees are starting to get ready to open up for bloom. Look for that pink bud, look for that bud swell on those leaves, so they know about when they need to be preparing their spray equipment, and they can prepare all the chemicals and personnel needed to get out and apply kind of their first spray for the season.
And you talked about the new product Axios. What are some of the things that you think really make that stand out?
So the great thing about Axios, like I mentioned before, it is a brand new mode of action, which means it has its own brand new FRAC group. So that's FRAC group 52. So this is a mode of action that previously did not exist. So what that means for growers is that, they've been using other FRAC groups for a long time, like 7, 9s, 11s, and 3s. So there's been some resistance popping up for a lot of those bloom time diseases. So having a new mode of action for these growers to be able to mix in their tanks really is a great tool for them. It helps with resistance management, and ultimately really helps to control diseases like that bunch of bloom time diseases that we talked about.
And you did a good job explaining it, but let's really highlight how important it is to have that new FRAC group. Especially when growers have been dealing with certain diseases over and over and over again, to have this new tool, completely new FRAC group, kind of is a game changer.
It really is. And, it takes a long time for, companies, discovery companies to be able to bring a new active ingredient to the marketplace. So that means that not only was it a new active ingredient that was discovered, but it went through all of the, resistance and, oh, what's the word I'm looking for? Residue testing to be able to, be brought to the market. And that series of events kind of takes up to 12 years. So the fact that we're actually able to bring a new frac group to the market takes a long time, and it's the result of a lot of years of work and research. And I did mention residue testing, and this frac group, a lot of questions we get with a new product is, let's talk about export markets and residues, and those MRLs, those maximum residue levels, have been established both in nationwide and internationally.
And that is a great point to bring up too. I like that you brought that up because it is something that our growers need to take into consideration. So the fact that that has already been considered and worked out is also very helpful.
Yeah, and it's another product to put in the tank. It helps kind of shoulder the burden of disease control. It doesn't have any cross resistance with any of the existing frac groups out there, and it's highly compatible in your tank as well. So very user friendly, environmentally friendly, and tank mix friendly.
All right. Is there anything else that we should be talking about or anything we've left out?
One thing I will mention, I did for Axios, its mode of action I said was preventative and systemic. So that means, especially for bloom time, you're going to have that protection up to 26 days. So decent residual of that new tissue. It also has protection and control of alternaria. So you can kind of get a jump on some of those summertime diseases as well. You don't have that bloom plus 2-week restriction with Axios. So it is really flexible for growers to use depending on their disease pressure in their field. So that's another thing we'd like to mention, is that flexibility with this new AI. And that new AI is called Kenoprol.
Perfect. So for our listeners who are taking all this in as they're listening, what's the best way for them to get more information?
To contact their UPL sales rep, reach out to them. You can reach out to me. And then we also have a link on our website, which is upl-ltd.com/US.
This is the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. We'll be back in just a moment.
Welcome back to the AgNet News Hour. Here's Sabrina Halvorson.
Residents of the Deep South along the Gulf Coast are still uncertain what to make of that once-in-a-lifetime winter weather system that left snow accumulations and icy conditions most are unaccustomed to. So how does this compare from a historical perspective, and what might it mean for the region's ag? Here's Rudd Bain.
Just how impressive was a late January Deep South winter outbreak? A 2-day event that, when looked at from a historical context,
among the top 1 or 2 all-time for snowfall.
Beyond that, according to USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey, was the amount of snow compared to places more accustomed to high snow accumulations and their season-to-date totals. Not to mention for Gulf Coast region residents and ag producers who have never seen a snowstorm quite like this one.
Real danger on the citrus side of stuff, as cold as it's gotten. Hopefully we don't have any dieback from that. We got some strawberry folks that are kind of watching their stuff pretty close.
I'm Rod Bain. Ken Kelly of Alabama Cooperative Extension System joins us as we look at a unique Deep South weather phenomenon in this edition of Agriculture USA. It was an interesting morning drive to work for Alabama Cooperative Extension System livestock specialist Ken Kelly, just 2 days after a rare weather event for his part of the country.
I have never had a drive like I'm experiencing. Ice everywhere, snow. I'm 50 years old. I've lived in this part of the world my whole life and have never seen it like this before.
It wasn't just the snow and ice that was unique last week in a stretch of the Deep South along the Gulf Coast from Texas to Florida. It was the amount and extent of this rare weather system. USDA meteorologist Brad Rippey says in addition to record or near record snow accumulations in several locations,
the cold weather that followed also formidable.
So regarding snowfall totals during the late January system,
Pensacola, Florida, coming in with an amended total of 8.9 inches. We also had official reports coming in from New Orleans International Airport, 8 inches and 7.5 inches in Mobile, Alabama. All three of those by far and away the biggest snowfall, single day, single storm on record for those locations.
Adding to the historical context of this event, Rippey compares Deep South snow accumulations of late January in regional cities with previous comparable weather events.
The only snowstorm I could find that was even really comparable occurred back in 1895, and that is a storm that hit on Valentine's Day. For Lake Charles, Louisiana, for example, which received almost 5 inches of snow on January 2025, it was the snowiest day since 1895 when a reported 20 inches of snow fell. Now for Mobile, Alabama, also with very long-term records, we had 7.5 inches there that fell on January 21st. That is the snowiest all-time day for Mobile. You have to go back all the way to January 24th, 1881 to find a comparable snowfall event in Mobile.
Perhaps even more impressive, the comparison of accumulation totals in southern cities versus season-to-date snowfall totals in some Midwestern and Great Plains municipalities.
Des Moines, Iowa, just 4.7 inches for the entire season to date. Rockford, Illinois, 7.3 inches. Rochester, Minnesota, 7.4 inches. So all those Deep South totals now higher for the season to date than many of those Midwestern locations.
Where snowfall totals in those areas are running 25 to 40% of average for this time of year. So what are some of the concerns and questions regarding the storm's impacts on Deep South agriculture? Ken Kelly starts with,
we're not used to water troughs being frozen and having trouble getting in to feed cows because of snow and ice. Surely because of mud, but not snow and ice.
In addition to care of livestock, another concern for Deep South producers after the storm.
How much does it knock our winter grazing back? How much does it affect our winter annuals and our clovers, stuff like that?
Meanwhile, Brad Rippey says questions are being asked about above ground crops susceptible to freeze during the winter outbreak.
Producers generally monitoring citrus and other winter crops in Deep South Texas. Producers continue to monitor winter wheat. Always worry about some of the nursery crops, the ornamentals, and backyard gardens where you just have things that are not typically exposed to temperatures in the single digits and teens.
The heavy snows came prior to the bitter cold in the Deep South, and Rippey says because of that order,
that snow actually provided highly beneficial insulation for ground-based crops, and that would include winter wheat as well as in southern Louisiana the sugarcane crop, which was completely harvested, so most of the new growth was fairly short and the growing point protected by snow cover in southern Louisiana sugarcane areas.
Damage estimates should begin this week as temperatures return to somewhat normal in the Deep South. This has been Agriculture USA. I'm Rod Bain reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C.
That's our show for today. This has been the AgNet News Hour. I'm Sabrina Halvorson. On behalf of Lorrie Boyer and myself, thank you for sharing your morning with us.
To get more information on the topics you heard today, visit AgNet West at agnetwest.com. You can also stay connected by following us on our social media at AgNet West on Facebook, Instagram, and X. Also look for Sabrina Halvorson on Facebook and be sure to subscribe to our podcast by searching for AgNet West on your podcast app. Thank you for listening to the AgNet News Hour from AgNet West. AgNet West Radio Network, your primary choice for agriculture news.